That was actually live. Let's see. Episode 1, do we got our narrative in here? We don't. Let's go ahead and let's update our narrative, shall we? Whoa. That is not what we want. Let's go ahead and copy some other stuff over here. Anyway, we are live, people. We are live. You think I'd be more focused, more prepared, but if you knew me, which some of you do, you'd know that that's never the case. Anywho, let's get the caption, the titles, episode 1, all of that stuff updated here. Still learning how to utilize Restream. There we go. Let's go save. Let's make sure we've got our video link and we are working. We are live, all of the above. Let's make sure we're good. How's it sound? Huh? Yeah, we do. We're sounding good. All right, people. Welcome. Oh, look at this. I made a list. Anywho, as some of you, which is only one of you at the moment, it's okay. Let's have patience. As some of you may know, I am putting together a video series, live stream series, not a podcast. I don't know what you'd call it, but for the time being, we're referring to this as Let's Talk Mold. And this is going to be episode 1. When we change the name, we might change the title of it, but nonetheless, hello guys. It's Tuesday evening, December 6th to be exact. I've got my list here in front of me. I do encourage you, the audience, to jump in. I've got some cold beverages here. I am staying put here for about the next 40 minutes, let's say until about 9 o'clock here. I'm thinking about an hour-long segment. Jumped on 20 minutes late here. Are you talking to me? I'm hearing things. Never mind. I've got some jitters, but good jitters, right? Good jitters. It's the first episode. Plus, the show cannot get any crazier than John Isaacson's Diojo podcast. John, you know what I'm talking about. Anywho, assessments. Let's talk a little bit about what I have going on. And as I said, feel free to chime in on anything and everything that you guys want to talk about. I'm here, like I said. Assessments. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on with me this week. So I'm doing a number of assessments. Looks like my live stream might have froze. Let's see if that's the case for everyone. I don't know. Are we frozen? No, we're not frozen. I'm frozen on my screen, so let's just keep moving forward here. But hopefully these live interactions are up to date here. Golly, Josh, we're off to a great start here, my friend. Not frozen. Thank you, Grenier. Is it Grenier? Let me know if I pronounced that correctly. I apologize if I didn't. Assessment. So here's what I actually have going on this week. This is actually a super fun week for me because as part of the assessment team with the company that most of you know that I'm a part of nowadays, I am working on some assessments, 2 in particular this week, that have to do with builders. And what we're doing on the assessment side is I was contacted, this comes through an attorney colleague of mine. I was actually contacted to come in and perform, let's call it a moisture and mold assessment, really looking into some of the concerns that that are their clients, which is going to be the occupants or the homeowners of these properties, were having, right? Some qualms that they had with the builder, whether it was builder error during the initial process or, whether it was issues that aroused, I don't know, one of those two, that came after the fact, i.e. they moved in, then they started having, a roof leak or something like that. Enter Josh. Enter Josh's assessment. And what I've done at 2 of these properties now, and I have to imagine they're just going to keep on continuing with the manner in which a lot of our South Florida builders build these homes. And some of these faults are their own, or their subcontractors, I should say. And some of them, unfortunately, is just kind of the luck of the straw. You have a material go defective or something of that sort. Now, with respect to these builder errors that I'm looking at here, I have one property in particular that I just performed a follow-up assessment at. I initially went out and performed the assessment, put together a scope of service. I wish I could say the scope of service was followed by the builder, but unfortunately it wasn't. So instead of me actually going back and performing what we would refer to as a PRV or a post-remediation verification, unfortunately I cannot. If I provide said scope of work or written protocol and you don't execute on that, unfortunately I can't go in and clear that work, so to speak. But I am able to go out. I did perform a follow-up assessment. I was able to verify that the previously wet areas that were on the surface were indeed dry, which is good. 2 thumbs up there. I was also able to verify that we have no worse of a mold problem than we had before. And I say no worse because when I did the initial assessment on this latest one, the indoor air quality was okay from the viewpoint of mold or fungal spores, right? So there wasn't really any recommendations in relation to secondary cleaning that was needed or anything like that. So just as a due diligence process, I went ahead and procured a few additional samples of the indoor air quality on the back end here during the second follow-up assessment and verified that, again, normal quantities, nothing atypical going on inside of that home. Even grabbed a couple of surface samples just to demonstrate whether or not the actual builder or the builder's personnel was effective in performing what they deemed a level of remediation. And again, just making sure that they didn't just cross-contaminate the whole place because we did have dust that was present. So was happy to report that actually that one went pretty well. There's, a couple of things behind the scenes that I'm not able to verify, but again, I don't get into those. Those are between the legal teams, the builder, the occupants, or the homeowners. So I don't really get into that. Again, I can speak to scientific data. I can speak to subjective findings on my part. What I can't speak to is what goes on behind a wall that has already been replaced before I come back in on the back end. Not even an infrared camera can see through walls. But that is some of what I'm working on when it comes to the builder-related assessments. I also am working on one assessment this week in particular with a sensitive individual, a client of mine that I've already done a couple of inspections for. This was actually with my last company prior to the acquisition of myself and my assets to the new company that I'm a part of. And we've just kind of continued the trend of not periodic assessments, but once this individual comes into possession of a new property, in this case, they actually bought a home as opposed to renting. So they had me come out, do some initial assessment work, do some testing, and then now I've come back out because they are still seeing some levels of, what would you call it? Bothersome properties. I mean, they're being irritated, right? So there's clearly something in this home that's bothering them. And as many of you are being enlightened to, as well as myself within the past couple of years, mold and fungal spores are just one piece of the puzzle. We've got microfragments, we've got mycotoxins, we've got chemical off-gassing, VOCs, we've got formaldehyde. I mean, the sky's the limit when it comes to indoor environmental hazards as a whole. Nonetheless, with this client, we are focusing on mold per their request. So I'm actually projected to go out tomorrow, actually, December 7th, and go back through their home. We're going to do some additional testing. We're going to incorporate a little bit of mycotoxin testing of the environment. We're going to pair that with an additional assessment. Since the last time I was out there, I did have some findings, made some recommendations. The mold remediator, in fact, executed on the protocol that I recommended. So it's always nice when people listen to what you're talking about. So happy to go back out there, see what's going on. You guys know, or as you get to know me, you're going to know more and more that I use the word sensitive, hypersensitive, sensitized, things like that, because again, in the past, I have, up until the past couple of years, dealt with, let's call it 80% of the population. These are folks who are fit, healthy, whether or not those play into healthy immune systems. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but all in all, when it comes to their immune systems, I've been used to dealing with folks that traditional remediation is the remedy that's needed, right? We go out, we have a mold assessor come out, like my colleague, Mold Detective. If you don't know him, Charlie with Mold Detective, awesome guy down here in the South Florida area. Somebody like him would go out, they'd perform some level of assessment and testing, depending on what they find. then at that point, my mold remediation company would go out and they'd perform a level of traditional remediation. Traditional meaning containment barriers, negative air pressure, removal of source material, i.e. the mold and water damage affected materials, and then basically a HEPA sandwich, HEPA vacuuming, detailed wipe down, and then HEPA vacuuming again. Versus now the more enhanced remediation that my team ends up doing nowadays is more on the, I don't know what the actual word that we would say, but more on the greater detail in the cleaning, the more meticulous. It's commonly referred to as a small particle cleaning. Sometimes we're doing a full-on small particle cleaning, which is to that nth degree where we're casting light across the surface, the flashlights, and making sure that we're getting all of this dust. And then in some levels, we're just doing very detail-oriented cleanings above and beyond what you'd commonly find with, again, traditional mold remediation services. So it's not that one is better or worse. One is just, in essence, more detailed, right? We're getting into everything. We're focusing more on the dust part of mold remediation than we are just the mold part of mold remediation. So that is something that I'm working on with one of my clients this week, which is going to be exciting because up until now, we've kind of thought that he might qualify as the run-of-the-mill remediation approach. What? Anyway, we didn't quite realize the sensitivities that this individual, this client of mine, might actually be having. So now we're starting to explore that. It was unbeknownst to me at the time, but he's since now told me, I'm symptomatic, I'm seeing all these things. So I was like, okay, well, rather than come out and perform a mold assessment like we've already done a couple of times now, only one in which at this property, why don't we try to kind of broaden things here, right? Why don't we focus less on the air sampling side of things, right? Why don't we focus heavily? Let me just get down on hands and knees, stick a borescope into anything and everything that I can kind of get that into, look around the dishwasher, look around the plumbing, things that we've done in the past, but maybe let's just dive deeper into this. But then also let's incorporate maybe testing for beta-glucan, maybe testing for mycotoxins, maybe even doing pulling out the mycometer and looking at the microfragments or the microfungal fragments that might be present. So tomorrow's going to be the day where I go out, meet with him, see what's going on, and kind of figure out what tools we're going to pull out of the tool bag and start to use. Beyond the assessment, though, some of the fun stuff that my remediation company is working on. So my remediation company, which a lot of you probably already know, and if not, surprise, I'm not as involved as much in the day-to-day remediation stuff, right? I still own a mold remediation company down here in South Florida. I'm still privy to everything that goes on. I still sign the checks, so to speak, but lots of work actually goes on where we're from the viewpoint of, again, talking to the chemically sensitive, the hypersensitized individuals, those that are more sensitive as a whole to mold and other indoor environmental hazards or indoor environmental toxins, I guess we could say. Those are going to be allergens, fiberglass, anything and everything that can cause some level of a reaction. Now, we've got a project out of the area. It's still in Florida, but not in our immediate Tri-County service area. Now, here's an interesting thing about this one. So Alan, who's my project manager over there, he is working with this client. One of the initial discussions that happened as they're fulfilling the mold remediation part of it, right? So there's no level of assessment or consulting on my end, their end. I mean, we're meaning my remediation company is there performing the remediation service. Now, what was provided to us as far as information is we had an ERMI test. For those of you that aren't familiar with ERMI, ERMI is a type of test that the EPA and Environmental Protection Agency used as part of a study a while ago. It's not something that they necessarily recommend for use for identifying mold in homes nowadays. Now, what you will find is, again, within the communities that are requiring more sensitivity when it comes to handling these things, and again, getting into greater detail, right? So when I say sensitivity, just so we're clear, I don't mean this as an insult, and I hope it doesn't come across that way. If it does, please leave me a comment and let me know. I absolutely don't mean to come across that way. That's just kind of how it was explained to me when I was coming up in this industry. And as a result of that, I've kind of maintained some of the verbiage and terminology. So again, if it does come across as derogatory, please let me know. That is why I have a comment and chat box. But back to this project, the ERMI test showed nothing. I mean, there was an ERMI score. There was references to the specific species that are present, but in general, there was nothing alarming. The HERTSMI, which is an accompanying component to the ERMI, not really, but really the two of them kind of go in tandem when we are working with individuals that are looking at this type of testing to add to the other types of testing and really kind of help out as a whole with the assessment. ERMI showed nothing, which is absolutely surprising when an ERMI comes back relatively low. And it's only surprising, I say that, and I'm getting to the end of the story here, when we have mold that we're finding. It kind of makes you go, okay, well, if the ERMI came back good, and that is a different form of testing that also looks at things from the viewpoint of PCR, which is going to be more DNA based, right? So it's either present or it's not. It's not a matter of, whether it's in the air at the time, because these are surface samples collected from dust. ERMI showed nothing, or low scores, I should say. The mycotoxins came back being very low. They might even have been non-existent. I don't know, but let's say low to non-existent, but they were a non-issue. They weren't concerning at all. And yet now that the remediation team's on site, spearheaded by Alan, my operations manager, he's finding a fair amount of mold growth, right? I debated showing you guys some photos, but I don't think so, because it's a little client specific as far as the layout of the home and stuff like that. So just kind of visualize what I'm describing. We've got HVAC diffusers, which is a fancy word for the air registers that you'd find. So if I had an AC system that supplied air into this room, and let's say this tile right here was where my air was blowing out, the decorative cover with the louvers on it. That's what we call an air diffuser, an HVAC diffuser. So we were finding, when those were removed, we were actually finding mold growth on the bottom side of that, or in this case, the top side, because it was on a ceiling. And we were finding mold growth surrounding the area where the register is. So clearly there's evidence of a condensation issue, an accumulator in that vicinity. I can only surmise that we were achieving dew point at some point, meaning that AC register, the temperature of it and the air coming out in that area was below the dew point, which would then cause some level of condensation, moisture development around there. And ultimately, we already know you throw moisture onto drywall, and what do you get? You get mold. So we had that going on. And then upon further inspection, Alan stuck, his iPhone up into the ducting and took some pictures, and you could just see just this caked on mold growth within the flex ducting. So flex ducting is one of those things where, in part, it's better than fiberglass ducting in that you don't have all of those fiberglass particles that mold can kind of deeply root itself and embed into. You have a plastic surface that kind of has a slinky-like coil around it, but the downfall to it is you can really only clean the areas you can access. So, what I can reach with an arm's reach or even a vacuum attachment, that's good. I can probably get that pretty clean. But what happens, 10 feet away? What happens 20 feet away? What happens on the other side of the house in an inaccessible area of the attic? Can't access it down low. That becomes the problem with mold growing inside of ducts. So something to keep in mind when you are in the market for ducting. My professional opinion, unrelated to anything going on here, metal ducting is where it's at. It's smooth surfaces. You can almost throw anything through that metal ducting, and, short of heavy vibrations, you're not really going to put a dent in that. And you're going to be able to clean that and have a surface you could almost eat off of. So the fact that we're finding mold in this property is kind of astonishing based on those initial readings from the viewpoint of the analytical data. Now, on top of that, we also had traditional sampling that was done. I don't remember the company, but they did some spore trap, which is going to be air sampling. They did some surface sampling, and nothing out of the ordinary came back. So it's just kind of, I bring this up for a topic of discussion. For those of you who know anything about ERMI testing or qPCR testing, I mean, you want to get a discussion going, drop it in the comments here. Let's talk about it, even as they go on with these other topics, because a lot of folks consider ERMI to be the end-all be-all in assisting them with identifying properties, or excuse me, with assisting them with identifying whether or not water damage did exist in this property. So, for example, it might not be going on their watch, it might not be going on the previous homeowner's watch, but the previous homeowner, if we have a high ERMI score, the thinking is that there was water damage within this property at some point in time between the time of inception, that is when it was built, to the time that this test has been procured. Now, the biggest problem with ERMI is it does not offer us any more information on that, or doesn't lend any additional insight as to, is this an old issue? Is this a more recent issue? Is this something that is hot off the press? This is actively going on right now. There's just, it doesn't lend that. That's where spore trap sampling comes into play. Even looking at other devices like, or not even devices, just settled dust sampling, right? Taking some air samples. I mean, if you have a house that is routinely clean, and then you come and you take a tape lift of a previously clean surface, and you're picking up lingering mold spores and things like that, or I should say more than lingering mold spores, you know that you have an active issue. Versus ERMI, you really have to go where the dust is. So you can't go to areas that are commonly cleaned and then, you have a small amount of dust that redevelops in between household cleaning regimens, right? You have to go above door jambs. You have to go in corners. Like, you have to get, I don't quote me on it, I don't do ERMI, but you have to get over 5 milligrams of dust. So it's quite a bit. And if you don't submit enough dust to the laboratories that are actually analyzing these ERMI samples, I mean, they don't have anything to process. They don't, there's not enough dust, and they will actually report on that. Not enough dust to, for a sample size. So anybody who knows anything about ERMI, anybody who wants to talk ERMI, that is something that I'm going to be talking more about in the future, because it is such a big part of my professional life, even though I don't do it, which is ironic, right? But I come across them so frequently. My mold remediation company comes across it so frequently. And whether or not I'm involved in the day-to-day, I mean, a lot of these things get kicked over to me under the guise of, Josh, what do you think of this? Like, how could it be that we have a low ERMI score, no mycotoxins, all telltale signs that everything's great because the traditional sampling methods came back okay, and yet, unfortunately, now we're finding all this mold? So needless to say, putting myself in the client's shoes, I'd be distraught. I mean, I wouldn't know what to think, right? I would question everything, because I was sold on, whether it was by one individual or the community. There's a lot of communities on Facebook. So anybody who's watching this actually that doesn't know, there's a lot of SIRS or SEERS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, Lyme's disease. There are a lot of groups on Facebook that I specifically stay a part of, just to be up to par on the discussions that go on, the good, the bad, the ugly, some of the horror stories, some of the, the triumph stories that I'm finally out of mold and living healthy. And, now I'm trying to open up, I know one in which that has a podcast now, and she gives back and talks to people and interviews people. And I mean, some great things are actually coming from this unfortunate piece of life for a lot of these individuals. So one piece of, again, what I wanted to talk about today, moving on though, just because I have a list and I just want to talk about things, and the latest with YouTube. So real cool, I am now using an app called TubeBuddy, and it's really designed and targeted at YouTubers, and it does a number of things. Number one, it shows me my subscriber count. It kind of looks like this for anybody that hasn't really seen it. Shows me my subscriber count, shows me my videos, shows me all of my comments and things like that. But it's also got a really cool section in here called the topic planner. And within the topic planner, it's just that I can go in and I can jot down my ideas, right? I'm driving, think of an idea, I use the voice text and just say, choosing the right moisture meter. That's going to be a topic that I want to discuss. And what it allows me to do is kind of take, whether it's my ideas that I've come about with. Let's make sure the camera hasn't froze here. I don't know. No, it hasn't. So we're showing frozen cameras, all over here, but clearly we're still live. So I don't know. I'll have to figure this out. I don't want to burden you guys with this. But anyway, so this topic planner is fantastic. So it's allowed me to jot down all of these things. For those of you that don't know, I've got an upcoming product review on a product line called Air Things. Air Things is the manufacturer. I think I've talked about it on one of the segments that I've done, but I've got something called the Air Things View or something like that, or Air Things View Plus, which is basically an Internet of Things device, IoT device, IAQ monitor, relatively low cost IAQ monitor that reads everything from PM1, PM2.5. It does read radon, which isn't big in my area, but it's definitely a plus for anybody who's in an area that's at risk for radon. It's also going to read VOCs. You're going to see in my video why I kind of made that face. Not really a fan of that. Well, I'm a fan of reading VOCs, but not the way that they're compiling this data. So TVOCs are total volatile organic compounds. We're also getting information on what else is in there. Carbon dioxide, which is huge, right? That's a surrogate that we use to quantify ventilation and how effective our ventilation is inside of our indoor environments, whether residential settings, commercial settings. I mean, these are all things that we want to be monitoring. So it can read CO2, and I think barometric pressure was the last piece of that puzzle there. But I have an upcoming review, Air Things product review, that I'm going to be talking about. I actually just finished shooting the video footage for that, so I don't have it here with me, but a lot of you guys know I do have a TSI meter. It's a TSI Q-Track XP Pro. Pretty fancy meter, if I can say that. Invested quite a bit of lunch money in it, but it's been a great meter for me to use to look at multiple IAQ parameters when I'm inside of these properties during just the medley of assessments that I do. So I actually took that device, ran it side by side next to these Air Things devices, and I took a total of 3 of them, right? I didn't just do one, because then somebody's going to say, well, how do we know you didn't get a Wednesday build, right? Just a crappy model, a defective model. So I took 3 different devices that I purchased from, I think, total of 2 different distributors at 3 different dates. So, right. So none of these came in together. So in theory, they should be part of, just a different assembly builds or assembly lines. Right. So I have an upcoming video review on the Air Things product. I do want to reach out to Air Things first before I kind of air this for you guys, because I did want to ask them some questions about some of the negative findings that I had before I kind of air out the good, the bad, and the ugly. Also had a meeting today with Delmhurst. So I met with their CEO, Tom, and also Robert was on the podcast on the Zoom meeting that we had this morning, and it was awesome. I mean, we talked about, of course, Delmhurst product lineup, their new BDX 30 meter that they had that came out. We also talked about some things that are on the horizon for them, and some things that they're going to have coming out possibly as soon as next year, maybe the year after, but they're already building on certain elements of the tried and true Delmhurst name. So they're coming out with newer versions of the Navigator Plus meter that a lot of you guys have, which is a multi-use meter, from the surface readings, the non-invasive readings, to the pin style readings, to being able to collect readings via the thermohygrometer probe that's on there. So that was an awesome discussion. Also got to talk to Robert, who's on their software development team, their technical team, and actually a lot of cool stuff for a company that's kind of tried and true, and what I kind of put in the, the old dogs category, as far as been around for years, haven't really needed to change the look and the feel and everything that relates to their meters. I mean, the fact that they're doing newer things is pretty cool, and kind of a testament as a whole to how the restoration and environmental industry as a whole is kind of, starting to look more into the tech side of things. I mean, we've got products like Encircle and Clean Claims, which Lane Larson heads up there. Kahi for asset tracking and even vehicle management and monitoring. So there's definitely a lot of tech that's being incorporated into our industry. Some other upcoming content that I have in the pipeline, like I just mentioned, choosing the right moisture meter. I'd kind of like to go, just even if it's just a high level overview of my experience with moisture meters, maybe some experiences that others have had out there, which I'll encourage, plenty of comments and correspondence on that thread when that video comes out. But should you go with the non-invasive meter? Should you go with the pin style invasive meter? Do you need all of this high-tech stuff like brands like FLIR and even this lower grade, but still pretty dang accurate meters? Or can you go with something as basic as general tools? I mean, for most of the population, general tools and even the consumer base, I mean, you don't need any of these high level fancy meters. I mean, you're just collecting some. Really, you're kind of looking at this data qualitatively, right? I mean, even if things aren't super accurate, at the end of the day, we're kind of looking for trends. I mean, if you stick a cheap moisture meter in most of your house and it shows dry, and then you stick it into one wall that you coincidentally were concerned with, and it shows that it's wet, I think the proof's in the pudding. The number doesn't even matter what the number shows. If it's something that's not like the others, what we call an anomaly, again, you got the information you need. And if you only spent $23 on a meter on Amazon, like, hey, that's a freaking win in my eyes. You take all the rest of that money you just saved now and put that into a professional remediation service, or if you want a DIY approach, into picking up the PPE that you're going to need and just anything else to make this thing the safest process ever. Ways that we can check for moisture levels or check for a leak without a moisture meter. I don't know if you guys know this, but you can actually use a multimeter to figure out if you have a wet wall. So things that I want to talk about. I was on the way to work one day and I was looking at the fact that we're testing capacitance, or I think that's the word, if I'm not mistaken, the opposite of resistance. So or conductivity. So we're testing conductivity in materials, which I believe is through capacitance. I got to think back to my ITT technical days. But the fact that we can use a multimeter, which is obviously going to show us conductivity between surfaces, that's fantastic. Because what if you're just an electrical guy? What if you're just a atypical homeowner who happens to have a multimeter sitting in a garage that your great grandmother left to you? If it's a Craftsman unit, it probably works, right? So if you could use that without having to go even on Amazon and ordering a $23 meter, because you got to blow the dust off and put some new AA's or 9-volt battery in there, like, why the heck wouldn't you want to use it, right? We just need to find out if we have concerning issues or not. We don't care what the values are. We don't care to call up a professional and say, hey, I tested 5 in this wall. Should I be concerned? No, I'm concerned with this wall. Whatever meter I used, I found an issue. Can you come out and look at this for me? Absolutely. Great. Fantastic. Continuing education. Let's talk continuing education. I want to discuss on a segment why it's important for folks to pursue continuing education. And luckily for me, because unfortunately I'm a little bit lacking in the credential area as far as going out and actively working to work on IICRC certifications and further my ACAC credentials, and even maybe start that ladder of RIA certifications. Fortunately, I'm exposed to wicked smart HVAC, IAQ, industrial hygienist professionals, IH professionals, right? All these different trades through LinkedIn, through YouTube. I mean, I consume all of this stuff. That for me is easiest, right? I've got a lot of books. I don't have the time to read them. I'm an Audible guy, but if you're going to post some good content that I can watch and learn some high level thermal imaging use cases and stuff like that, like, why wouldn't I want to? So we also have to remember that there is plenty of content out there, whether you're a professional looking to consume this and have continuing education, or whether you're a consumer just looking to kind of better prepare yourself to make sure that you're not had when you bring professionals into your home. Like, consume it however you want. The information's out there. So mold-related continuing education, water-related continuing education, thermography, you name it. I do want to have a video segment on that, so thereby it is in my topic planner. Also wanted to take a second to give a shout out to an upcoming, let me see if I can find the information real quick for you guys, and then I can do a quick screen share. We have an upcoming segment, or not a segment, but a conference that is really geared at the building science folks. Let me search from my buddy Pete Consigli. There you are. I think he sent it to this email address. He did not. Let's go to my other email address, search our friend Pete Consigli. We've got an upcoming conference. Here it is. There we go. Now we're finding things. Let's do a little screen share. Where are we, Pete? Where are we, Pete? Right here. So here is some information on it. I am going to do a quick screen share with you guys. Let's move this over here. Let's open you up. Let's do a little screen share segment. Is this? There we go. All right. So this is going to be the 2023 Andrew. I believe it's pronounced Osk. I believe it's Osk, not Ask. I just found this out by listening to a recent podcast. For those of you that know Dr. Joe Steesbrook, Steesbrook, I think is how it's pronounced. Wicked smart individual. I've looked at a lot of his content online. He's got a very decent amount of white papers. And this is going to be happening January 24th and 25th. For the professionals out there, this is definitely something you should look at. John Tooley, who I've also seen in person, Joyce Owens, Brian Orr, for those of you who are involved in the HVAC industry. This is what's going on. 2-day event. We're also going to be getting together myself, Pete Consigli. We're going to be doing the night before on Monday, which is going to be January 23rd. I think John Isaacson is going to be doing a Diojo podcast, but that also might be during the event. But nonetheless, we're getting together for a night prior happy hour social event that's going to be going on. If you want any information, drop a comment. I'll make sure that I shoot you over an email. Maybe even make it easier. Just drop your email in the chat box here, or even just kind of send me a private message, or even email me directly, josh@learniaq.com, and I can get you any more information if you are curious on this. But this is going to be an absolutely awesome event. From my understanding, and this is something I've never been to, but this is just, I'm super excited for this. But nonetheless, I've got 6 minutes here that I dedicated to this time frame. So let's kind of go over. I think we went through everything, and then I got a upcoming video on the Realtor of the Year. I actually had quite a fantastic exchange, I guess you will, with a real estate agent that brought me in on a project. So stay tuned for that video. I'll go ahead and drop it. Answers, air answers. So the air answers results are in, and I'm excited to share these. So for those of you that know, and I'll kind of go through this, and if we go a couple minutes over 9, not a big deal. I went ahead and did some indoor environmental testing using the Air Answers device. Kind of moved this thing around my house here, which, speaking with our contacts, our lovely contacts, Rachel specifically, she told me I didn't need to move the device around the house. So now I know. So what we also don't know is, because all these mold levels are non-detected, we're also wondering if, as a result of me moving it around the house, if maybe this thing didn't fire up and have that 5-day runtime like it was supposed to. So nonetheless, just take these for visual representation. This in no means is, we're thinking at least, factual data that's representative of my home, which if it is, this is great, because I'd love to have no mold detected, but very seldom do you find that. And actually, speaking with Rachel, that's a bit atypical of what she's used to. But for those of you who have not been exposed to Air Answers and wanted some information on what their reporting style looks like, the information that is included in it, here you go. We've got a customer name there. We've got a barcode number reference. We've got the date, the lab testing date. We've got the date that they issued the report. We've got the location name here, which, again, this was a test sample that I did. So, I mean, Rachel already told me some of this is kind of incomplete, if you will. And then, of course, the approving party before this thing went out. So right off the rip, our beta-glucan molds are going to be right there at the top. So if they're present, we've got actively growing mold. This is where you're going to see it. In this case, we have none detected, which I pray that's the case. I'm going to do a follow-up test. Spoke to them. I'm going to send it in. I'm going to leave the thing alone. I'm not going to touch it for 5 days, and we'll see what that comes back as. What I'd like to do, and maybe I'll add this to the topic planner, is, kind of compare and contrast some of the reports out there and, the reporting styles, and just kind of see what some excel at, what some don't excel at, and just thinking out loud, maybe a future topic, but nonetheless, we'll get there when we get there. As far as this report, we're going to see the different mold genera. We're going to notice the trigger word here, DNA. Like I said, it's PCR sampling. So we're looking at it from the DNA level to find presence is or isn't, right? So if there was any presence of Aspergillus there, it's going to show up here. It's going to have an associated level, Penicillium, Stachybotrys, Fusarium, et cetera, right? So we've got that there. And then we get into the fungal pathogens. Same thing on the DNA level. If you guys want any deeper levels on this or deeper discussion, this isn't going to be the video for it because it's not really. We're just kind of reviewing what this report looks like, just so you guys can kind of be a little more privy on what it looks like here. The mycotoxins, RNA. If you guys remember, if you've been on their website or if you don't remember, they cover 4 primary mycotoxins, which are the 4 that are listed here. As you see, according to them, there were none detected, nothing applicable, right? The verdict's still out on whether or not this is accurate, but nonetheless, this is where it would be reported on, and we would see it just like this, our green, yellow, orange, red. Now, scrolling down, big surprise. Those of you who know me know that I'm a big animal lover, as is the rest of the family. We've got dog allergens. We've got cat allergens. We don't have mice, which is great. So you can see here, we've got higher levels. That's nothing new, right? We clean, and yet the hair just stays there, right? It goes away, it comes back. I'm sure if you asked me, do I think there's a possibility that one of the cats rubbed up against the Air Answers device while it was going on? Absolutely, they're cats, right? So let's look at it there. We're going to see our different allergens that are present. Our grass pollen, again, having animals go in and out. These are things that we're going to see show up. Down here, they have a contaminant concentration key. As you can see, most of these are in the green, which is a beautiful thing. They consider green to be not detected, or as she would say, extremely low levels. And then we get into, nope, I lied. I'm sorry. Not detected if it's not present, which is green. Green is good. Then when we start to get at maybe the low concentrations where the laboratory is not necessarily worried about it, it's not on the radar as something concerning, that would be where we fall into this lovely yellow category. Then we get into the medium, and then we get into the high. As you guys saw, when it comes to the pets, it's nothing new. So we have Air Answers testing recommendations. Scrolling on down, you've got their key reporting, their notes, and their definitions. So this is where they start to talk a little bit about the beta-glucans and the allergens, how they report on these things, how they distinguish between the different concentration levels, their limits of detection, and I think we're on, page 4, if I'm not mistaken, page 3. It's going to also give you a deeper dive into it. Not detected, it's below the assay limit of detection. Their low concentrations, medium, highs, etc. Then they start to talk about the mold genera, mycotoxins, and the opportunistic fungal pathogens. And then on page 4, if I'm not mistaken, it's a continuation of that. They discuss that a little bit more. They talk about now here what they consider to be the concerning levels, or where they kind of rate these from green, yellow, orange, red. For your Aspergillus, your Penicilliums, your Stachybotrys. Now, one thing you are going to notice here, and I spoke to Rachel about this, and we're going to have a little more of a to-be-continued conversation on it, because she has a lot of respect for the folks at Normie, and we do know that they are everywhere. Normie is everywhere. Normie's got continuing education classes across the board. I'd be lying if I said they're not a name and they're not out there, right? I personally have a problem with zero tolerance molds. I think it's such a case specific, let's say a little more subjective too, because if we talk about those who I mentioned that are more sensitized to molds, they're going to react more to different species of Aspergillus and Penicillium versus traditionally your Stachybotrys, your Chitomium. Those are, as Normie's calling it, the zero tolerance molds, but those are more of our trigger molds. Those are our water damage molds, right? Those are the ones that we commonly see when there's been years of continued moisture that's contributing. We're not talking low levels of moisture like your Cladosporium and your Aspergillus penicillium-like molds are going to absolutely love and thrive in. We're talking about your heavy 100% saturated areas for long time or long durations of time, your window leaks, your door leaks, your roof leaks that were just kind of unbeknownst to anyone, and all this water coming in. So the fact that they cite Normie here tells me, one, that Air Answers is paying attention to what's going on in the industry, because they wouldn't know the terminology zero tolerance molds if they didn't know of Normie. So from speaking with Rachel, she's had conversations with Doug Hoffman and the rest of the Normie team, and she felt like she and the team, let's paraphrase here. It was decided that this was going to go into the report. So I'm actually curious, and I bring this up, otherwise I would have glazed over it, because I'm curious on what you guys think. Those of you that are mold professionals, what do you think about Normie zero tolerance molds? Those of you who aren't mold professionals, but obviously are passionate enough to be watching a 45-minute long video, right? Which, of course, I thank you for, and I love you for being here with me. But if you got this far along in the video, chime in. Tell me what you think. I mean, what do you feel is the worst mold that's out there? What do you feel, even if it's, for your case, your child's case, maybe your relative, what have you heard? What do you think firsthand are some of the molds that you want to avoid, right? So chime in, give me your input on this. This was mentioned in here. I mean, it's something that obviously Air Answers puts a lot of weight on, zero tolerance molds, and that's going to be indicative of where we have these genera and where we have these much lower levels. I mean, look what they consider to be low in these different variations, right? 1 through 789, 1 through 2359. So again, topic of discussion. Let's talk about it. If we need to get so Robert, you just commented no cladosporium. I mean, cladosporium didn't show up. That to me, and I'm sure you, Robert, as well, that's a shocker. That is, because it's so common. I mean, we just did, so for example, we just pulled samples at a project. I don't remember how many we pulled. I think we pulled a total of 7 surface samples in or around the HVAC system, and 6 of them came back with cladosporium. And we're not talking about low levels. We're talking about major levels of cladosporium. So, Rachel, what gives? So, we need to talk about these things. I mean, it's and even getting back to the mycotoxin talks, there's a specific species of cladosporium that has a mycotoxin in there that is very concerning within the mold community, right? A lot of individuals, I think they call it the moldy. They call themselves the moldies, right? Those that kind of eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff, no pun intended, because they're in this. They have issues. They're battling through this, and there are doctors either telling them that they have no idea what it is, or simply put, a lot of people are turning them away, saying they're crazy. And I'll tell you right now, from somebody that used to be on that other side, working with the general population and then working with people that I considered to be the problem, because it can't be my methods, right? I know how to do mold remediation. These folks aren't crazy. They just need to be understood. They need to have things explained to them, maybe listen to them, maybe understand that they've probably done a lot more research than our entry-level mold assessors of the world. But whole nother topic, Robert, getting back to what you said. I mean, cladosporium is a BFD. That's something that should be in here. We should be talking more about cladosporium. And scrolling through here, and anybody who wants to see a copy of the report, let me know. I have no problem sharing this with you. Obviously, I'll redact any private information, but I mean, for the most part, I mean, most of this is just general discussions. Getting into the zero tolerance molds right here. This is what they consider to be the zero tolerance: Stachybotrys fusarium, trichoderma. I always butcher this name. Memnolia. I always say memnolia is kind of how I call it, and then chitomium. So that is the 5 of them. So what else should be in here? Robert already hit the nail on the head. Cladosporium. I mean, that's a concerning mold. A lot of some folks out there have I think it's aspergillosis. So many other things. I mean, there's this industry for me is so fascinating, and as much as I feel that I already know about it, it's like I still feel so infancy on this, because I mean, you have the whole medical side. And I was speaking to a doctor today about, some of what goes on in the indoor environments and what he sees as a medical practitioner. And it's just bridging that gap. I mean, some amazing conversations come from this, but nonetheless, I digress. You guys kind of see what's going on in this report here. If you do want to see a copy of it, let me know. More than happy to share this with you guys. But I mean, other than that, just kind of getting back to bringing this video to a close. I've got lots of content to share. I've got nothing but time. I want to do more of these. Let's Talk Mold, episode 1, subject to change. Probably, quite frankly, I'm planning on changing the name if it ends up being Let's Talk Mold. I mean, I'd be surprised because I like a lot more than mold. But nonetheless, let's bring this thing to a close. 8 minutes late. Any questions you guys have, please drop it in the comments below. If it's anything private, and hey, a lot of this industry is private. I'm starting to understand that. Hence why I developed a mold remediation company that has the term discreet in it. I understand discretion. It's so invasive in so many people's lives. So if you want to discuss it on a private or personal level, shoot me an email, josh@learniaq.com. You can also go to my website, which I've literally put together just as a means for you guys to get in touch with me to where it's in a private setting, iaqjosh.com. You'll be able to see some upcoming events that I'm going to be attending. You'll see my most basic contact information to get in touch with me. Other than that, drop a comment, hit the like button, subscribe, share this with a friend, a family member, anybody out there that you think could benefit from this. As always, I appreciate you guys watching. Thank you, Robert, for jumping in. Grenier, I think that's how you pronounce your name. And to the rest of you that are on here that haven't commented, if you think of anything, I'm here. I appreciate everything, and thank you guys for joining me on the very first episode.